Newsflash. We've got conventions in Iowa happening during a pandemic. Information regarding reedpop's first big online cosplay competition. And updates on conventions, big and small, both canceling and not. This and more on Con News Tonight.
Hey guys, I'm Ashlyn.
I'm Al.
We are Vie Cosplay.
And this is Shit Cosplayers Say. And today we have a massive amount of convention updates for you.
I feel like we need that news bulletin
I know,
sound effect
right?
where it's like do 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 do.
Think of the word for it right now. Pressing updates. Con News Tonight.
Con news, but this airs in the morning.
It airs when you decide to listen to it.
We're not silly.
No.
Not at all.
So we have a lot of updates for you about Iowa specifically, because at least one of us is local to Iowa. And Iowa, as you may or may not know, is still pretty much open. And this is about mid-August when we are recording this. They still are one of two states without a mask mandate. And living in Iowa, not that many people really wear masks all that often. It's about 50%. It's gotten better since the big box stores decided they were going to have mask mandates now. So people are kind of taking it seriously. But we are, of course, opening our schools. It apparently the place to also have a convention, because there were quite a few of them. Well, and Iowa's kind of a surprise for people in a lot of ways. We got to have a hurricane.
Yep.
That was fun.
You sure did.
I lost my fence.
My cousin lost her garage.
Yeah, no, my fence legit blew away. We got all the pieces. It's tied up with rope right now. But we lost a good chunk of the shingles off our roof and most of our fence. That was wild. Not gonna lie.
Well, I mean, you did have 100+ mile winds going through.
Luckily, I have friends in Cedar Rapids who got the storm before us, and they were like, dude, this storm is insane. They're posting video and stuff. Insane winds were like, you would have thought we were having a tornado, but we weren't. So I run outside to gather as much stuff as I can with literally 15 minutes to spare before these insane winds came, and threw all my planters around my yard and smashed a bunch of my lights and then uprooted my fence.
So the real question is, did you have Iowa hurricane on your 2020 bingo card?
I did not have a hurricane in Iowa on my 2020 bingo card. I didn't even know that this was physically possible.
What about fire tornado? Because I know that's next up on the radar.
I did not have fire tornado. That sounds like more of an Oklahoman thing. A fire tornado.
Yeah, it's out. I believe it's out west.
Yeah. I don't think we're dry enough to have a fire tornado.
No, it's not for you, but
okay.
The U.S. in general.
I mean, it
what
could
is
happen.
This?
We had a hurricane. I mean, anything's possible now.
Yeah, we just got the tail end of it here. Strong winds, yes, but I didn't know what everybody was talking about when I looked outside. I'm just like, okay, we lost some sticks, I guess. And that was about the extent of it.
Well, and of course I totally did the Iowa thing where I sat and watched it the whole time.
Oh, but did you do the super Iowa thing where you watched it outside?
No, I watched it from inside, but I had no idea. I did not know that's what we were getting. I just thought we were getting a storm. I did not know what this was. And I got lucky. We only lost power for 12 hours. So that was much better than the, week that a lot of other people had.
I know people that live across the river from you that lost power for a whole week. And it might be, by the time that we're recording this, some people in Cedar Rapids still don't have power.
I believe that's true.
Over like a week and a half later.
But Iowa is known for sometimes not doing the smartest thing. Part of the reason we had conventions in Iowa is because the state government decided that it was completely fine to be open, which made it nearly impossible for events to cancel.
So for those of you that remember from our previous episodes, if the government, for whatever reason, determines you can't have an event, let's say due to event size or specific mandates regarding what kind of things you have to do, if they're not able to accommodate those, you can cancel your event under a contract clause called force majeure. But if the government's like, nah, it's fine, then nope, you don't get that.
So the government was all like, meh, it's fine. So our first large convention event, which luckily was outside, was Vintage Torque Fest, which is a car show and kind of a pinup sort of festival. This happens out on the fairgrounds in Dubuque, Iowa, which is massive. So normally this event has like 20,000 people, but from what I was told by people who went, it wasn't even remotely close to that. So it made it really easy for people to distance. No one really had to be anywhere near each other. It also was smaller because I guess there was another event in Wisconsin the same weekend that's also just as popular. So people kind of had to split their time between the events. But for the most part, what people reported to me was they felt pretty safe because there was a lot of space and they were outside. They felt pretty good. Dubuque's kind of a hot spot for COVID. Doesn't seem like anything happened due to this event specifically. But that doesn't necessarily surprise me because it's the same people that also run QuadCon. QuadCon also happened, like, the weekend after in Davenport, which we've talked about before because we've gone to QuadCon before. But it's a small one-room convention that happens in, like, this little banquet hall, basically. They had markers for distancing. Everyone had masks on. It was required. But just because it's required doesn't mean that people do it. People seemed to be distancing from what I could see in the photos and stuff. Like, they came with their groups, they stayed with their groups. I know they were regulating how many people came in and out at a time. People who went said they felt really safe going. It seemed like it went really well. There were a lot of, like, cosplay-themed masks for QuadCon.
Which is super fun. I mean, if you have to wear PPE with your costume, you might as well enjoy it.
That's why I have one covered in rhinestones for Harley that I may eventually use at some point.
Yep, and you've got your beaded one for Judar.
Based on how well they did this time, they're supposed to be doing an event at the end of September at the Marriott, which is where Anime Iowa happens in Iowa City. So if I don't have COVID by that point, or things are looking okay, you may be able to catch me at the QuadCon in Iowa City. I've kind of told them, providing my work doesn't have an explosion of COVID or I don't have COVID myself, that I would consider coming. They do plan to do like 6 feet between tables because they have this massive room. You know, they take it very seriously and I appreciate that. John wants his vendors to be as safe as his attendees, and I think that's something to support. So I would feel safe going to a QuadCon. So we'll see what happens, but I also don't want to bring COVID to the people. So I have to make sure that I'm in a place where it's not likely that I am carrying COVID before I would come and attend.
They also had a QuadCon in Springfield, Illinois.
Oh, they did. That's right.
And they did. So Illinois does have a lot of restrictions in place. And the particular venue that they held it at, I actually used to staff like a gaming and general geek convention at that particular location. And they also have huge, giant, all of their rooms are enormous. So you definitely would have been able to do the distancing. But because of Illinois and the restrictions that we have here, they actually ended up moving the event outside and had it in the parking lot. So everybody was still wearing masks, I saw a lot of cosplayers show up. Some of our podcast buddies from the C2E2 Chicago podcast meetup we went to, they were there and did a little bit of coverage of it on Facebook. So that was kind of fun to look at. But yeah, overall, it looked like everybody had a good time and everybody was distancing the way that they were supposed to. And kudos to the QuadCon crew.
We did also, in Iowa, have your standard 3-day anime convention happen at the very beginning of August. Anime Zing actually happened. So Zing typically is in competition with Anime Iowa. For some just unfortunate reason, those conventions typically get booked on the same weekend and they're only 45 minutes apart from each other, which is unfortunate, but
especially for the attendees.
Well, exactly, because then you have to pick
then
which
have to
con.
choose.
So although FunkCon, which was about a month before, which is in the same area, and Anime Iowa, which was on the same weekend, 45 minutes away, were able to cancel in May. For some unknown reason, Anime Zing was not able to cancel. We don't know what Zing's contract is, and we're not going to go into the company that runs Anime Zing. You can look them up, but we are talking about them because we are talking about conventions that happen in Iowa. From what I was able to find out, they attempted to move it to a later date, and they couldn't, and they were unable to cancel it. So they had to have it. Normally, you see a lot of advertising for Zing in the area. I saw none. They really weren't pushing it online. We don't really know a lot of people who went because pretty much no one did, which was why they were able to maintain their requirements. They had your pretty standard requirements. You had to wear masks, no dances, concerts, raves, none of that. There were some live events, but they had spaced chairs out in groups, so you had to sit with your group. They gave the guests kind of their autonomy to decide what they did and did not want to do. They had some hand sanitizing stations. There wasn't really information about, like, occupancy or vendor hall, but Zing is held at the River Center, and it's massive.
It's a really large venue, so even when they are chock full of people, it looks very sparse just because of how large the space is.
Zing usually barely hits 1,000 people, and it was far less this year. So they had plenty of space to distance themselves because the River Center is so huge. Honestly, usually there's a lot of photos and a lot of buzz when Zing happens. I had a really hard time finding photos from Zing. I really only found them from the one person that I know who went, but there really wasn't anything posted on any of the, like, Iowa Facebook groups. They're lucky that they're in such a massive space, honestly, because a lot of smaller cons would not have nearly that big of a convention center. And I think if they hadn't had something as large as the River Center, it would have been really hard to pull off. I was actually more surprised by people online being upset that, like, there wasn't a con suite or a rave. And distance seating. They were upset about the distance seating in main events. And I'm like, dudes, you're in a pandemic. Like,
right?
You want a con suite? I don't eat from the con suite normally.
Right.
Because ill germs. Like, you want to eat at a con suite in a pandemic?
Well, and it just doesn't make any, like, the con suite specifically, I think of the space that they actually use for it, the hospitality suite that's right there, and you're not supposed to take food outside of that. I know a lot of people take it into the skywalk going back towards the parking garage, which technically isn't part of the hotel. You can't have people eating in the room and taking their masks off because then they're breathing on the food that you're preparing. Or the drinks that you have set out for people. Like, it doesn't work.
It just surprises me how oblivious people are.
Well, and I did see a lot of people being mad about the fact that the event happened. But again, you have no idea what was going through anybody's head. The information that was given out was that they were not able to move the date and they were not able to cancel like a lot of other places did. So you're really stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Well, and they also ended up doing the thing that we have seen a lot of conventions do because of this rock and a hard place, is they also offered the con online. Like, last minute, they had like an online stream for the convention as well.
Well, and that might be one of those things that they couldn't figure out until they got there, because a lot of conventions aren't used to streaming anything, so it's an entirely new concept for them.
But now we don't even have those choices because our last cons for the year have been canceled.
Dun, dun,
Because I am sure at this point you all have heard that Colossal Con was canceled.
Yes, they moved to Labor Day and then they canceled.
They did, however, allow everyone to move their rooms to 2021.
That's nice.
So we now have a room for 2021. Whether or not we'll be able to get in the masquerade is unseen because I believe they're rolling everyone over from 2020. You never know. Depends on if there's a spot.
Yeah, that's one of those rough things. And then you would have had some people who could have gone to the original date in June, but then couldn't go to the date in September, but maybe now they can go in June again, and it's good luck to y'all for figuring out what you're doing with that hot mess.
Right? Yeah. No, and I'm sure we have a room. That doesn't mean something's not going to come up.
Right. There are so many things that can happen between now and then.
But I purposely kept the room in case this happened. Because we were all hoping they were going to cancel and roll us to 2021. We didn't want to go on Labor Day weekend. Like, even without COVID, I didn't necessarily want to go on Labor Day weekend.
Right. We were planning on it, but, then it got worse. And then they canceled.
Well, and, we wouldn't have been able to enter the masquerade anyway, because we wouldn't have had anything.
Well, the people that we knew that were going, I believe, had a spot, so they were going to go, and we could have watched them, but now they also have a room for 2021, and we have a room for 2021.
You have a room, and you have a room.
You have a room, and you have a room, and you have a room.
Well, and then, of course, you had the people who were super pissy who canceled their room after it moved to Labor Day weekend, and then wanted to know if they could get their rooms back. Nope.
Probably not. See, that's the problem, though, is that they canceled, and then people who were waiting to get a room then moved in to get those rooms, and then all the rooms scheduled for the September weekend got moved to June. So it is what it is.
I don't think they've reopened them yet for people to be able to pick up the leftover rooms, but I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I haven't seen anything on it. Now, maybe if they even have any way of tracking it, they could offer the people that had canceled their room when it first moved to September the opportunity to book any extra rooms that don't get rolled over first, but it's hard telling what they're going to do with it. That's really a Kalahari decision, and the con probably is going to have very little control over
free for all. It's just going to be a free for all.
I mean, it's usually chaotic trying to get a room at Colossal Con anyway, so
I'm not even sure how we've had one the last couple of years, but
dumb luck.
Well, it was really ridiculous when we had 5. Was it 5 rooms that we had?
That's because literally everybody put in. There were
we all got a
8 or 12 of us that put in for rooms, though, and that was just a little absurd.
Because we got 5 out of 7 of us got rooms. I'm pretty sure. It was a lot of rooms. And they were lodges.
There was a lot of rooms.
On top of it.
I love lodges. Lodges make
We do not have a lodge.
Room.
We have a hut.
Alas.
I know. I probably should have called when I moved my reservation to be like, do you have any lodges?
I would go to the Kalahari and just stay in a lodge just for the purpose of staying in a lodge.
Well, the Kalahari costs like 3 times as much, not during Colossal Con.
Can we find a non-anime event to go to and find a coupon
code?
Go
find a conference of some sort?
Yes. Let's find out what else is at the Kalahari. We'll just go there then.
You can go to a conference on cats.
I don't care what the conference is about. I'm not going to the conference. I'm going to the hotel.
So we can just go to, like, an optometrist conference and then get a cheap room.
Sure. Whatever works. They're going to be busy with their thing, and we're just going to go hang out at the swim bar. I mean,
what could go wrong?
This sounds like a great plan. Yep.
So, the other area that we are close to as far as conventions are concerned is the Chicago area. Now, Chicago has drastically different rules from Iowa. It's like night and day.
They're on the naughty list in Illinois.
We have returned to being banned from Chicago again. Iowans are banned again from Chicago.
That's because Iowa is one of several states on the naughty list that has 15 or more cases per day per 100,000 people. Like, there's even a map on the Illinois Department of Public Health website, and it's got all of the states with less than 15 cases per 100K are highlighted in blue. And then all of the states with 15 or more cases per day are highlighted in purple.
Yeah, we're still on the naughty list. We're going to be there a while. So Chicago, obviously, conventions there have been canceling because Chicago can't really have conventions until they're in stage 5, which means a vaccine. Which, yes, that does make everyone go, but what about C2E2?
Everything is canceled.
They have not canceled. However, all the other reedpops have been canceled. Are no crown preliminaries for 2021.
We'll just say it's very likely that C2E2 will end up canceling.
Unless there's magically a vaccine or we somehow quelch COVID by end of March, I don't see it happening.
I'm going to say probably not.
Yeah, it's not likely. And really, once like it was pretty obvious that Crown wasn't gonna happen, I was kind of like meh. reedpop, in the meantime, attempted to do like an online Crown / that contest that I participated in on Sunday, like this hybrid contest. So like first you had to just send in some photos to like be juried to be chosen to compete. And then you had to submit a portfolio, basically a video of your judging. So like you explaining your costume, and then a walk-on. And your costume had to be 70% made. Your costume had to have 0 awards. Originally, when they first opened the contest, it also had to be a brand new costume that hadn't appeared on stage, but that rule appeared to have changed between when they opened it and when they closed.
Gotcha.
Because I did not enter because of that rule. It was like, I don't have anything. So, can't do it. They really only gave about a week's notice, which seems to keep happening with these online cons. Like, I need more than a week's notice that there is a competition happening.
Right?
Like, especially if you're going to have a requirement where, like, 0 awards or it needs to be brand new. Like, I need more time.
A little heads up would be nice. Yeah.
You know? And then if you're also going to require, like, a portfolio and multiple videos and you're giving people a week. I mean, they had a week to enter for the juried portion. And then I think they had a couple weeks to get the other materials in. But still, it's like...
Well, in the middle of summer, that just... When people are trying to do what little they can outside, away from other people, like, that's just difficult. And I mean, what if you don't live with somebody that can record you and you have to get somebody that needs to come and like distance themselves and just, it's a whole to do. I mean, what if you're working full time and you don't have the free time to meet up with somebody to be able to do a lot of these things within like a week or so?
Well, yeah, and that's kind of my, like, that's been my thing with these online contests in general. And like, people are always wondering why the turnouts are what they are. For this one, the entries were really good, and this was supposed to be juried. They had 3 divisions when they started, beginner, intermediate, and expert, but no one won best expert. So someone won best beginner, best intermediate, and best in show, which usually means very few to no one entered an expert, typically.
And just because you have entries in a category doesn't necessarily mean they're going to award a best of. We've seen that before.
That does happen. We have had to do that. But this was a juried show.
Right.
So you just wouldn't have put those people in the show.
Yep.
If you didn't think that they matched that level, or you would have dropped them down a level. Because you can do that in a juried show. You cannot do that in a regular masquerade. But congratulations to Sarcasm Hime on Best in Show, Pleaberry Cosplay on Best Intermediate, and Chaos Cosplays on Best Beginner. They had really nice stuff. I mean, they had really great entries for this, but, like, so the expert... I don't like expert as a category. It's very confusing. And they did define it basically as like a professional cosplayer. So the definition was competing at a high level or someone who is a professional or semi-professional cosplayer.
Because that's very specific.
Right. Like what does competing at a high level mean? Like that can mean so many different things depending on the person.
That's very subjective, yes.
Now, like, we would have entered in expert, because we would have felt that that's basically the replacement for Masters. Most people would read this and go, well, I'm not a professional, semi-professional cosplayer. I'm not going to enter in that category. Because they're thinking more like Yaya Han or Kinpatsu or some of the, like, crown people who come every year that it's like their legit job is to be a cosplayer. You know, that's who they're thinking is in that category, and then nobody enters. Because the categories were not defined by awards or anything. They didn't even define beginner and intermediate. They only defined expert.
Well, I feel like beginner is typically pretty
intermediate can be the hard one. Like, what does that mean? Does it mean I've won an award? Does it mean I've only won a couple? Does it mean How does that work? And I'm sure it was a really good competition. I just get frustrated with these online competitions. Because it's just like, the expectations are so crazy.
Well, and I think we've talked about this before. Doing any sort of craftsmanship judging over the internet is going to be infinitely more difficult than doing it in person.
Well, yeah. But it's like, you're giving people such a short period of time to... Because you also had the videos and the photos had to be done now. They couldn't be previous video. From like a previous competition or a previous photo shoot. It had to be like stuff you did right now. So that means you need to get the entire costume on. Mm-hmm. You need to do special videos. You need to do special photos. You need to put a portfolio together. It needs to be a brand new costume. Are they still all assuming we're home and not working? Like, I wonder with these online competitions, it's like, are y'all still assuming that we're all home? Because most people aren't anymore. I get that people put these competitions together because they think they're helping the community. And maybe for part of the community they are. Like, for me, it just makes me feel like I'm failing and not doing enough.
Do you need to go back and read our cosplay affirmations?
I do. That's when I have to go check that.
A while ago.
Because I don't need to be keeping up with these competitions to feel validated.
Keeping up with the Joneses.
Which may be why they're not getting, 100 entries for a lot of these contests. Because I am probably not the only one who can't keep up. But for those that can, they have their outlet, which is also good. So it will be interesting to see if reedpop attempts to do some sort of online crown in place of the crown. Because at this point, how do you have crown if you've had no preliminaries?
Well, and it's not just here.
They've had no preliminaries anywhere.
All over the world have been canceled at this point. So my assumption would just be that 2021 crown is a wash. And that they're just going to start over once we can start having cons again.
I mean, that was my assumption too. But I know ECCC happens before C2E2, I believe. Because it's usually the first preliminary for the following year.
Yeah, well, and I think it just kind of depends on what year it's been.
Yes.
Because Chicago's moved around a lot the last few years as far as bouncing back and forth. Because it's been in April, March, and February, so it just kind of depends. But I do believe you're correct that they're usually the first stop on the U.S. circuit for C2E2 someday.
But we do know one con that is currently happening, one large con, and that's YomaCon.
Well, so far.
The city of Detroit is currently not allowing YomaCon to cancel.
Well, yes. At the moment, they are not allowed to cancel. However, they're still not in that, sweet spot window where they would be able to cancel, because a lot of that is going to be dependent on what kind of mandates come out and when they expire. Mm-hmm. Any mandates that are currently in place, which if the mandates that are there now are still in place by the time that YomaCon is supposed to happen, they won't be able to have a con. Except the mandates, if Michigan is like Illinois, we could only do 30, 31 days at a time, and then we had to issue new mandates. If it's the same way there, they're going to have to wait until much closer to the actual convention to be able to cancel.
Well, I can also get, the venue wanting to wait and see if things get better. Yoma's not till the end of October.
Right. Yep, it's Halloween weekend, Detroit, Michigan, right there on the border across from Canada.
This whole thing puts these poor cons in a rock and a hard place because people are asking them to cancel because they want to move their rooms to the next year. They want to get their badges refunded. Yoma's offering at least rollover for badges to 2021 already. So if you don't feel comfortable going, you can roll your badge.
Yeah, you can absolutely go ahead and do that right now.
But it's definitely not YomaCon's fault that they can't cancel. So stop being mad at YomaCon.
It's one of those things that I'm just assuming that it's going to happen.
Oh,
And
it's
it just
likely.
hasn't
I
yet.
mean, Daisho's in the same boat where they haven't officially canceled, but they're allowing people to, like, refund badges, and they stopped selling badges, and...
I think they actually went ahead and just automatically refunded everybody's badge for... They did. They actually automatically refunded everyone's badge for DaishoCon and stopped selling them. And I don't even think they ever opened their room block.
They did not.
I think. Because normally they don't open their room block until summer.
Yep.
So they're pretty much like, well, if we can have it, then we'll just go ahead and open the room block then.
But it's also way too far out for them to be able to cancel, so...
Yes, because they're weeks after.
Right. They're actually doing the smart thing where they don't want to put themselves in more of a refund hole, so they're just cutting it all off and being like, no more.
No mas.
No mas. We're not selling any more badges.
No mas.
Well, and I think it's confusing for people because they see conventions like Holmat, which is in freaking December, cancel, and NYCC, which is like 2 weeks before YomaCon, cancel. And then they're like, well, why can't Yoma cancel? Well, why can't Daisho cancel? Well, every venue has different rules.
Well, and every state has different rules right now. We don't have federal mandates as far as needing to cancel these events of certain sizes. So it's on a state-by-state basis. So depending on what your state's rules are, how long your state rules are that are currently in effect are in effect, and then it also depends on the specific venue, because we've had a lot of conventions cancel because their venues decided that it wasn't worth the risk to their staff to go ahead and have the event. So they went ahead and canceled all of their contracts.
At this point, it's not looking good for anything before, like, May. When do you think the first con will be able to, like, safely happen without major amounts of COVID? Because we're still going to have COVID next summer. I mean, I don't think this is something that goes away. I think it's like the flu, where we're going to have to continue to deal with it.
Well, and I think it's one of those things that is going to change what our normal definition of the word normal is. I think it's going to be a while before we're going to be able to see any really big cons. Now, as far as like small conventions, you're, under 5Ks, you might be able to start pulling some of those off a little more safely. Except the problem you're going to run into is venue size. Because if we're still needing to meet specific social distancing requirements, then you're going to have to limit your capacity. And I think that that's going to be a problem for some cons, for the cost of the venue versus how many people they're physically allowed to let in. Now, I do think that the more this goes on, the more the actual venues themselves are going to be their own advocates as far as putting together social distancing spaces, going ahead and making those marks on the floor that are already predetermined, sanitizing spaces, going ahead and putting in those stations so that they're available for all of the events that are held at their particular center to use. I would be really surprised if you don't see plexiglass shields set up in vendor halls in the future as just part of their normal, like, draping that they do with their tables going forward. I would expect, especially larger convention centers like we're used to seeing for, like, C2E2 and Anime Central, where they do all that pipe and drape for you, I would be super surprised not to see those shields offered at, of course they're going to charge for it, but if you need it for your event, you're going to go ahead and pay for it, or else you're going to have to pay for it yourself.
I feel like as a vendor, I would almost like that because people would stop touching all my stuff all the time.
They're still going to touch stuff anyway.
Not if the plastic's in front of all the stuff.
Well, but typically, the way that I've seen it in retail environments, it's not that the plastic prevents you from being able to touch the merchandise, but it's going to be at the height of where people are going to be talking at you. So you're still going to be able to pass things under the window, essentially, but your staff that are behind the shield are going to be protected from the direct, I guess, droplet spray.
I've seen both, where it's been in front of the merchandise and behind the merchandise for tables.
Normally I see it where it's elevated, so you've got maybe a foot or two underneath where you can still hand things back and forth really easily, like a credit card or a piece of merchandise. But if somebody is talking to you, unless you've got like a small child, they're not going to be able to have their droplet spray go past the shield on either side.
Yeah, I would just want stuff in front of my whole table because I don't want people touching all the things.
Well, and it might be one of those things that vendors just do that themselves and go ahead and get their own shields that they can hook to their tables so that they don't have to worry about it. And they don't have to worry about their staff and volunteers. They can just have everybody behind the table and not worry about it. And then you'll just have your small opening somewhere to pass currency or your credit cards back and forth along with the merchandise.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what they all decide to do. I mean, the first one that I'm looking at is St. Louis, which is a smaller one.
And they're already talking about what safety precautions that they're planning on taking. Good for you for looking ahead. And good for you for starting that conversation with your attendees this early. Because pretty much as soon as they decided that they were going to cancel for this year, they started having that conversation online on their social media with, hey, what would you guys be interested in and what would you find acceptable as far as safety precautions go?
It's one of the big reasons why I'm like, I will consider St. Louis because at least I know they're going to take this seriously.
Yes, and they obviously expect their attendees to take it seriously.
Right.
And they're looking for that valuable feedback from people as far as what they're willing to put up with, I guess, is the way I'll put it, because, you know, there's a lot of people out there that obviously don't like the restrictions that are having to be in place because of COVID. But at the same time, what's going to make people feel safe and feel safe enough to attend an event like this?
Well, it will all get safer if we all wear our masks and don't touch our face.
Don't touch your face. Wash your
hands. Wear your mask. Don't touch your face. And maybe we can stop doing these type of con news updates.
Where everything is canceled.
Be nice to do a con update about an actual con.
I mean, technically, we did talk about some cons that actually did happen. Obviously, we would like to be able to trust people to do what they're supposed to do with these restrictions so that we can have an event. But anybody that's been to a con and experienced con funk before knows that people don't practice good hygiene, when, especially at anime conventions. They're going to need a lot more volunteers and a lot more physical and financial resources in order to be able to pull off enforcing a lot of these things. So that's going to be a struggle, I think, that we see for people coming forward.
Well, I mean, there are a bunch of colleges that are already closing because they couldn't make it a week.
I did see that. There have been several of them that popped up that started classes within the last week or so, and they weren't able to do it. Like a classroom environment, you could kind of compare maybe a classroom environment to a panel environment and how they interact with one another in like a main events room or a dealer hall. So I'll be curious to see what the schools come up with and how that kind of relates to what we see with events going forward.
Most of it, honestly, is solved if people just wear masks properly. But yes, wearing a mask for 8 hours a day does suck. Yeah, we were going to plan like a cosplay picnic for the locals this year, but nope.
Yeah, I would be totally willing to go like meet up with people if we could stay apart from them, but
I did that for our distance photo shoot and it was fine.
It's hard to do a lot of the other normal like outdoor gathering things if you can't be close to each other. Maybe in 2021 we can do a local cosplay meetup.
Right? Maybe in spring of 2021.
So remember, wear your mask properly. Don't touch your face. And wash your hands.
You've been listening to Shit Cosplayers Say, an LVC production. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Podcast SCS. Our website is viecosplay.com. Have a fun, crazy con or cosplay-related story, absurd cosplay question, or just something in general to share with us? Email us at podcastscs@gmail.com. Thank you for listening, and remember, just because you can doesn't mean you should.